Danny Masterson has been a staple on television for the last 25 years, but behind the scenes, he was violently attacking women, many more women than you've heard about in the mainstream media. There's been a lot of discussion that none of his victims said anything for over 20 years and then accused him out of the blue with no evidence, but that couldn't be further from the truth. Masterson was a lifelong member of the Church of Scientology, and Scientology has allegedly not only been aware of these attacks, but they've been pressuring victims to not contact the authorities. Masterson's victims finally had enough and contacted the LAPD several years ago. After over half a decade of investigating, Danny Masterson was finally charged with attacking 3 women. Despite the fact that Masterson and his 3 siblings are famous celebrities who appeared in huge TV shows and movies, there was barely any media attention around Masterson's trial. Despite the hundreds of articles and dozens of interviews, his trial barely garnered any coverage. But suddenly, overnight, millions of people were weighing in because Masterson's A-list friends, Mila Kunis and Ashton Kutcher, leapt to defend Masterson and wrote letters praising him as a trustworthy friend that they would leave their own young children alone with. In this video, we'll be discussing absolutely everything to do with Danny Masterson, his trial, consequences, the aftermath, and also the fallout from Ashton Kutcher and Mila Kunis's glowing endorsement. Cameras weren't allowed in the courthouse, so I hope this video can represent everything you've wanted to know about this case and trial, plus everything Scientology doesn't want you to know, including some old interviews and comments that certainly take on a new light with Masterson's charges in mind. So sit back, relax, and let's dive in to the life, crimes, and trial of a Hollywood monster who almost got away with it, Danny Masterson.
Well, I ended up getting the job, and I didn't know. Yeah, she was as hot as she was, you know. 14, she was even hotter. But I'm not allowed to say that.
Hi, my name is Danny Masterson. Would you like to touch my balls?
Why are you asking people to do that? That's the more important question.
I mean, you got them.
Yeah, right. I've heard about you. And you'll be caught soon. I know you will.
I will.
And you'll be caught soon. I know you will.
I will.
Viewer discretion is advised, as this video discusses extremely serious topics involving SA. Outside of court convictions, everything is alleged and based on research. Sources available in the pinned comment. Danny Masterson and his siblings all grew up in the Church of Scientology. They've all also been actors since their childhood, with their mother Carol acting as his and his siblings' managers. His brother Chris went on to play older brother Francis on Malcolm in the Middle, and his sister Alanna went on to play a lead in The Walking Dead for many seasons. Masterson and his brother were child models for the Ford agency, and they did print work in early childhood, later moving on to commercials and eventually moving into television and movies. Danny Masterson's first film role was in the 1990s classic Beethoven 2. He then went on to do a few more TV shows and movies in the mid-90s, including 2 episodes of Roseanne and the movie Face Off. Face Off also starred fellow Scientologist John Travolta, and Danny Masterson's small part seemed to echo his future crimes.
Carl, stop it.
Calm down. Calm down. This whole fucking old school. Calm down.
In the late 90s, Danny continued to multi-episode arcs on shows like Party of Five and Sybil, but it wasn't until 1998 that Danny hit it big, when he was cast on a TV show called Teenage Wasteland. After the show went through several working titles, they finally settled on one, and on August 23rd, 1998, the show that ended up running for 8 years premiered under its decided upon title, That 70s Show. That 70s Show ran for 8 seasons and was an enormous success. With 200 episodes, it was made Fox's second longest running live-action sitcom ever, just behind Married with Children, though it didn't quite have the same rating success. Masterson starred alongside 5 other cast members: Topher Grace, Mila Kunis, Laura Prepon, Ashton Kutcher, and Wilmer Valderrama. There seems to have been a lot of improper behavior behind the scenes of that 70s show, and it appears as though Mila Kunis in particular went through and was exposed to a lot on the set.
Meanwhile, at the same event, Mila joked that the boys on the show did joke around with her quite a bit over the years.
Was it hard growing up? Of course, because Ashton and Topher and Wilmer, they're all a bunch of jokesters. So were they torturing you like a little sister on the set back then?
Yeah, I mean, I got pantsed a lot.
Ended up and I'm
But it was all
swear. And
Yeah, but you look really hot in it.
well, thanks, Danny. I don't feel very hot in it. I have to say, like the waistband. I don't know if you could see this. Is literally up to my 1/3 rib, and it's polyester. It's tight. It's not flattering in my opinion.
I ended up getting the job, and I didn't know. Yeah, she was as hot as she was. Come on.
14.
14, she was even hotter. But I'm not allowed to say that.
And have you guys learned a lot from this acting job? I mean, has it taught you a lot about acting, Hollywood,
No.
the whole thing?
There obviously was inappropriate things that we know about, like her first kiss with Ashton Kutcher when she was only 14 and he was 19. Mila Kunis and Ashton Kutcher later recounted this story in an interview with my friend and avid watcher of this channel, Rosie O'Donnell.
You know what's funny is when she was 14 when we started the show. I was 19, right?
Right.
And they're like, okay, you guys are gonna be making out in this scene. And I'm thinking wait, this is slightly illegal,
That's
right?
probably your first kiss ever, right?
It was my first kiss. Why did someone bet you made with Danny about our first kiss?
No, it wasn't the first kiss. It was like the second or third kiss.
It was the first. It was like the first week.
No, it was not the first week.
Whatever. Let me tell you what happened.
No, maybe you tell you about that.
No. Okay, so I never kissed the guy. So I was so. I mean, Ash was attractive, and I was a 14-year-old little girl, and I was extremely scared for my life.
Sure.
And he was very nice about it. He was like, "Oh, don't worry." So I was like, "Okay." Then Danny goes and goes, "Dude, I'll give you $10 if you French kiss her." What would you stick your tongue in my mouth or some?
What? No.
$10.
So Danny bets me $20 that I wouldn't do it. And of course I'm like, yeah, sure, what's the deal?
And then the cop showed up and you got arrested pretty much.
They should have,
He
but they
never
didn't.
did it. And
I so did it.
He claims to this day he did that. I swear.
Mila, I so did it.
He never did it?
I didn't let him. I think he tried, but I think I kept my mouth so closed.
Yeah. You did the old teeth block?
Yes.
While I've been going through a number of old interviews for this video, there's been a lot of very questionable stories and accounts, and we'll discuss those later in the video. Flashing forward for a second, 4 of Danny Masterson's That 70s Show co-stars wrote letters for him while he was awaiting sentencing, and we'll discuss those individuals and the letters later in the video. But the majority of those letters all repeated one story from the early days of That 70s Show. Danny Masterson was the oldest of the 6 kids on the show, and in the first season, he sat the group down and told them that they had a good thing going with the show becoming a success, and this was their shot, and nobody better ruin it for him by doing drugs or being an idiot and having the press splash their mistakes all over the magazines. That 70s Show was very abruptly cancelled during its 8th season due to the ratings significantly dropping due to the loss of stars Topher Grace and Ashton Kutcher. Masterson remained best friends with Ashton Kutcher, and throughout the show, all of the cast were extremely close, with the exception of Topher Grace. Rumors always existed that Topher didn't like Masterson, and that as Masterson was the leader of the group of the rest of the cast, Topher didn't have much to do with the cast outside of work. Topher just showed up to work, found his light, read his lines, hit his marks, and went home. The rest of the cast were so close to Danny Masterson that all of them, except of course Topher Grace, went yearly to the Scientology Celebrity Center for Christmas parties, Christmas plays, and just to regularly hang out.
I'm a woman and he's a man. Rawr, and I'm a talking dog. But none of that matters to me.
You know, I can hear what you're saying.
Yeah, I mean, Kutcher Mila are my 2 best friends, and Laura's basically my sister-in-law, and I watched Mila grow up since she was 14 years old. So those are family.
We're basically in each other's heads.
Laura Prepon, who played Donna on that 70s show, not only converted to Scientology while on the show with Danny Masterson, but she also dated Chris Masterson, Danny's brother, for almost a decade and the entire run of the show. Ashton Kutcher's assistant for many years was a Scientologist, which could not have occurred without the explicit permission of Scientology. We'll discuss Scientology a lot throughout the rest of this video, and there are a lot more stories and references to Ashton Kutcher and Mila Kunis later on also, but we'll get into all of that later in the video. Masterson continued to work mainly on TV over the next decade, and he remained close friends with Ashton Kutcher and Wilder Valderrama, so close that they opened a restaurant, and Masterson also opened a club called Guys. Masterson's club had a dark reputation, with many women coming out and saying that they had been drugged on the premises. One evening, as many as 7 women were taken away in ambulances with suspected drugging. Masterson also had Lindsay Lohan removed from the club one evening, as Lohan angrily shouted at Masterson that she was going to call the cops on him. Lohan had previously guest starred back during the run of that 70s show, and she was also at that time dating Wilder Valderrama. Wilmer was continuing his long history of befriending and then dating underage girls, only going public with their relationship the second that they turned 18. In 2016, Kutcher and Masterson starred and were the executive producers on a new Netflix show called The Ranch. Many of their That 70s Show cast members guest starred on the earlier seasons of The Ranch. Interviews that the pair did discussing their early 20s as party boys in Hollywood came across as innocent enough initially, but that was before the accusations against Masterson went public. But when you look back upon them now, with everything we know, they do take on a much darker tone.
You were big on the party scene. A little bit, yeah.
He had like all the hookups.
Look, we took a night off a week.
But he knew like he'd been here, like grew up in the whole thing here. And this was like pre-TMZ, pre-cell phone camera. So you could like go out.
Right.
In this chapter, we'll discuss the accusations against Danny Masterson, the first trial, and the 3 victims. By victims, I mean the 3 Jane Does that Danny Masterson was charged with attacking in both trials. And in the first trial, there was a 4th victim, Trisha V, who testified. And in the second trial, there was another victim named Kathleen, who was attacked by Masterson in Canada. Throughout this video, I'll refer and discuss to many, many, many more women who have come forward and continue to come forward about Danny Masterson attacking them. You will be surprised by the amount of women, and based on everything we know about reporting SA crimes, there are a lot more victims out there. When it comes to this case, this trial, this story, a lot of people have just read the headlines. They've talked about how this is nothing more than women claiming something that happened over 20 years ago. But that's actually not true. We'll discuss this in the chapter and throughout the video, but these attacks were reported back in the early 2000s. There is a rule in Scientology, a very strict rule, that no Scientologist is allowed to report another Scientologist for a crime to the WOG authorities. WOG is Scientology slang for the outside world, for anyone who isn't a Scientologist. All 3 victims were Scientologists, so Scientology stopped them from reporting their attacks to the police. But even so, some of these women were so hurt and so disappointed by Scientology's handling that they did go to the LAPD. Much more on that in a minute. Even Leah Remini and her show Scientology the Aftermath was brought the story in the mid-2010s, and her show investigated for almost 3 years. Leah interviewed 2 of the original 4 victims in 2017, but they couldn't air the episode until 2019 so that they didn't interfere with the investigation. So let's start with the allegations and we'll go on from there. In March 2017, 3 women filed SA allegations against Danny Masterson. prompting an investigation by the LAPD. Through his agent, Masterson denied these accusations. In December 2017, after a fourth victim's accusations, Netflix fired Masterson from his TV show The Ranch. He worked on this show with several of his That 70s Show co-stars, including Ashton Kutcher. Netflix issued the following statement: "Yesterday was Masterson's last day on the show, and production will resume in early 2018 without him." Masterson stated that he was obviously disappointed in Netflix's decision to write his character off The Ranch, but prior to Netflix writing his character off the show, there was two controversies. On December 4th, 2017, the Huffington Post published an article that while at a soccer game for their kids, one of Danny Masterson's accusers was talking to another parent. This parent turned out to be Andy Yeatman, who was an executive at Netflix. When the accuser asked Yeatman why Netflix wasn't taking any action against Masterson, because by this stage they still hadn't issued a statement on him or fired him from the show, Yeatman then said, "Oh, it's because we don't believe them," in reference to the alleged victims. Netflix, who was embarrassed by this story, fired both Yeatman and Masterson, but it's obvious that that is what was going on inside of Netflix, because there was a second controversy involving Danny Masterson. So this story involves a former production assistant on the show The Ranch, and this production assistant's name is Nick Olszewski, and he ended up emailing his former boss, who was Melanie Patterson, and Melanie was a producer for The Ranch, but she also worked on That 70s Show for nearly its entire run. So Nick reached out to Melanie after reading the initial Huffington Post article about what happened with Danny Masterson and the Jane Does. So Nick had worked on The Ranch for 3 seasons, and in some of the articles that have come out about this, he has been quoted as saying, "Danny and I were really good friends for about 1.5 years, and we hung out a lot." After a taping, Danny would typically have an after-show party at a private room at La Poubelle, a French restaurant across the street from the Scientology Celebrity Center on Franklin. So Nick didn't put in his initial email what he wanted to tell Netflix. He ended up just sending the email saying that he had something that he wanted to tell them in regards to Danny Masterson and his behavior, and he just basically had a story to tell them. So that's all Nick told them, but Nick said what he wanted to tell them was a few things, and there's a few like anecdotal things. Like he said that his girlfriend had only met Danny Masterson a handful of times, but that she was always really creeped out by him because he would always try and kiss her, and he would always touch her like really inappropriately for someone that she didn't know. He was always touching like really low in her back and like on her sides and stuff, and she's just said she didn't get a good vibe. Obviously that's not like concrete evidence, but Nick also said there was a few times that he heard Danny going really nuclear on some people down the phone when he thought no one was around. But the main thing that Nick wanted to just inform Netflix about was a conversation he heard between Danny Masterson and his co-star Alicia Cuthbert. Nick said before Alicia and her sister and girlfriends were going to Las Vegas for a birthday party, Danny gave them a crash course in how to avoid getting roofied. Nick said he thought it was strange because Danny knew a lot about roofies. Again, nothing absolutely wild, but I can see, especially the last one, why he wanted to say something just in case. It's not going to really cause any harm to say something. Well, that's what he thought anyway, because when somebody reached back out to him, it wasn't actually his old boss. It wasn't Netflix. It was actually Danny, because the producer had immediately gone to Danny Masterson and assumed that Nick was trying to tell them something to help Danny, not against him. And the producer said, "Oh, get in touch with him." And Masterson ended up texting Nick, and I will put a screenshot of this text on the screen, saying, "Yo, my bro, just finished run through. Mel told me earlier you hit her up with info to help me with this bullshit I'm dealing with. What you got?" and that was pretty much the only text that there ever was. But there was a phone call from someone who identified themselves as Andrew to Nick and wouldn't give Nick their last name or their title or what they did, who they worked for. And Nick said, I'm not going to just tell anyone this random information, and I'm also, not really comfortable with just having a conversation with you and me. Like, I'd rather have someone there as a witness. And he later actually found out that this person was Andrew Brentler, who is an attorney who works for Marty Singer, who is the legendary Hollywood attorney who has represented Masterson for years. Nick said he did reach out again to the producer and say, who is this Andrew guy? And the producer allegedly said, oh, it's one of our Netflix guys, which is obviously fake. And in a very bizarre coincidence, although Nick says he thinks it was a deliberate choice, but I'm not so sure about that. You can make your own decision about this. When Danny Masterson was written off the ranch, his character drove off after being threatened at gunpoint by a character named Nick. So that maybe is just a bit of a strange coincidence. Again, it's nothing crazy, but I just thought it was worth mentioning because you do just kind of see how so many other people are enabling the behavior behind the scenes or even cleaning up their messes. A few weeks after this, a fifth woman came forward and made similar accusations against Masterson, and he was dropped as a client by his talent agency, United Talent Agency, which he had been with for over 20 years. In August 2019, the four women filed a lawsuit against Masterson and the Church of Scientology for stalking and harassment stemming from the rape allegations. One plaintiff claimed her dog died from unexplained traumatic injuries to its trachea and esophagus, also alleging that church members chased her as she drove her car, filming her without permission, harassing her online, and posted ads to social media sites soliciting sex in her name. Another plaintiff stated that she and her neighbors observed a man snapping pictures from her driveway, and later that night, someone broke a window in her 13-year-old daughter's bedroom. Masterson has since responded to one of the plaintiffs in the lawsuit, claiming, I'm not going to fight my ex-girlfriend in the media like she's been baiting me to do for 2 years. I will beat her in court, and look forward to it because the public will finally be able to learn the truth and see how I've been railroaded by this woman. And once her lawsuit is thrown out, I intend to sue her and the others who jumped on the bandwagon for the damage they've caused me and my family. He did not address the stalking or harassment claims. In January 2020, Chrissy Bixler, who is Jane Doe 3, reported that a second family pet had been euthanized due to being fed rat poison wrapped inside a rolled up piece of raw meat, alleging that this was done by Scientologists. Also that month, Masterson's wife, Bijou Phillips, made an Instagram post mocking court papers against Masterson. On June 17th, 2020, Masterson was charged with raping a 23-year-old woman in 2001, a 28-year-old woman in early 2003, and a 23-year-old woman in late 2003. The 3 counts came after a 3-year investigation beginning in 2017. On January 21st, 2021, Masterson pleaded not guilty. On May 21st, 2021, Los Angeles County Superior Court Judge Almeida said that she found all 3 witnesses to be credible and the evidence presented during a preliminary hearing sufficient to support the charges. She ordered that Masterson be bound over for a trial on 3 counts of rape by force or fear, and he surrender his passport at his next arraignment, which was set for June 7th, 2021. On June 7th, 2021, Masterson pleaded not guilty to rape accusations alleged to have occurred between 2001 and 2003. His defense attorney accused the 3 women of colluding against Masterson, claiming that they were in contact with each other. His defense attorney also stated that one of the Jane Does had obtained money from Masterson in 2004. After the June 7th arraignment, Masterson remained free on a $3.3 million bail. The trial began on October 11th, 2022. There were a few key differences about the first and the second trial, and I'll explain those in just a minute. Masterson decided not to testify nor call witnesses to his defense. Both parties rested their cases on November 14th, 2022, and made their closing arguments the following day. The jury deadlocked after 3 days in deliberation. Instead of declaring a mistrial, the judge ordered the jury to resume deliberation the week after Thanksgiving. The jury remained deadlocked once deliberations resumed. Consequently, a mistrial was declared on November 30th, 2022. The jury foreperson said that the panel of 6 men and 6 women leaned towards acquitting Masterson on all counts because they found the testimonies of the complainants inconsistent. Most legal experts and people who followed the trial closely agree that the reason the jury became deadlocked was due to 2 key elements that were kept from the jury and the courtroom. One was the drugging of the 3 victims. That was not allowed to be mentioned in the first trial, and neither was Scientology, specifically the Scientology reports. Considering all 3 victims were members of the Church of Scientology, and due to Scientology's strict law of not involving the real-world authorities in Scientologist crime, the jury in the first trial were not shown that the victim reported the attacks to Scientology higher-ups over 20 years ago. This matter was allowed in the second trial, and the drugging was actually also allowed because the defense themselves opened that door during testimony. So we are going to discuss the trial now. Just 2 quick things going into the trial chapter that you need to know. There's 2 words on the screen, and I will be referring to those words as their initials, the R word and SA. This is just to do with YouTube. I'm sure people have heard this before. It affects the monetization, but also how the video is pushed out. If a video is not monetized, it is not put into YouTube and pushed out the same way, because YouTube looks at the video and thinks, well, I'm not going to make any money out of this, so why should I push it out when this video, I am going to make money on it. And if you want to see how true that is, look at my video about the Duggars, because I didn't monetize those so I could speak freely. This is when I knew a lot less than I know now, and unfortunately this is just the way YouTube works. Because I've taken multi-month-long courses with people like Paddy Galloway, who is all-knowing about YouTube, just was in Forbes, worked for Mr. Beast, and that's just the way the algorithm works. One thing I will say is, though, I do not do sponsorships on my channel. For me and my channel, that's just not something I want to do. I think it affects the viewers' time, and it's not something you can opt out of with like YouTube Premium, so I don't really want to put that in my content. And also, a lot of those things turn out to be scams. So this sort of content that I'm doing, where I'm talking about scams a lot of the time, I don't want to be caught up in anything like that. And also, if I'm not talking about scams, I'm talking about stuff like this, where I don't want to go from talking about that and then be trying to sell you something. So that's just my opinion from my content and me. Everyone else is free to do whatever they want and whatever they deem necessary, but that's just also what I want to let new people know too. So you'll not have to go through sponsorships. So let's discuss the trial. There was something that happened between the 2 trials, and it was about the first trial. I didn't see this reported nearly anywhere, or well, actually nowhere in the mainstream media. The only person I saw really talking about this was Aaron Smith-Levin, who runs the channel Growing Up in Scientology. A lot of the information in my video I have got from Aaron's videos, because he actually went to the trial and was there every day, and there was only 3 people that were in the court every day. So it was really difficult to get kind of a blow by blow of what went on in court, because there was so few people that actually attended every day. But Aaron actually broke a story about the jury foreman in the first trial, who he had actually lied to get on the jury. And not only was he a former police officer that he didn't tell the court about, but he also had a son who was convicted of something very, very similar to Danny Masterson. It just, his crimes weren't against women, they were against children. And I'm sure that was a factor, given that he was the foreman as well, that severely affected the first trial. But we're going to discuss the second trial now, and after the trial section, we'll go into the sentencing, but also discussing the letters and everything that happened on social media with people like Ashton Kutcher and Mila Kunis. So the trial involved 3 accusers, 3 victims, and each of them was known by Jane Doe. So there was Jane Doe 1, Jane Doe 2, Jane Doe 3, and this is to do with Marion's Law in California, where they don't put the names of the victims. All of the 3 women have identified themselves in the media. One of them, Chrissy Bixler, who was Jane Doe 3, she was Danny Masterson's girlfriend for about 6 years, nearly the entire run of that 70s show, and she has always been open about who she was and which Jane Doe she was. She even was the one who did the interview with Leah Remini back in 2017. The other Jane Does are known as Jen B and Nisha. So if you hear me say Jen, Nisha, Chrissy, that's each of the Jane Does, and it's obviously all okay that their names are known and it's known which Jane Doe they were. Everything like that is completely open now. While there were 3 Jane Does who were actually the victims, accusers in this case, there were other women who were witnesses and referenced in this trial. And after the trial and during the trial, actually, there was a lot more women that came forward and said they were victims of Danny Masterson. These are only women we know about, so I'm sure there are other women out there based on the statistics of how underreported SA crimes are. And at the time of this recording, there were approximately 17 known victims of Danny Masterson. So we're going to go through each of the women's stories, and I'll go through them the order that they went in trial, which is Jane Doe 1, Jane Doe 3, Jane Doe 2. And we'll go through basically the outline of their stories and a little bit of what happened in court, and then just anything else that is deemed relevant. One thing about Masterson is he seems to be incredibly arrogant, because anytime that he was going to the courthouse, I mean, there's multiple pictures on here, and I'll put them on the screen too, where he was arriving at the courthouse and posting on Instagram as if it was some, check-in at a restaurant or something. He was even tagging the courthouse, certainly not giving the situation the respect it deserved. Jane Doe 1 accused Masterson of SA and the R word in 2002 during their first sexual encounter. After that happened, she went to her superiors at the Church of Scientology, and she went in and basically told them what happened. She was sent into an ethics program, as Scientology believes that you are not a victim, that anything that happens to you is your fault. So they were basically saying, this happened to you, so you must have brought it on in some way, because there's no such thing as being a victim in Scientology. The Church of Scientology ethics officer afterwards told Jane Doe 1 to make peace with what happened, and made her complete an ethics program where she was taught she was responsible for the alleged crimes. There's a quote from Jane Doe 1 that says, "My understanding my entire life was that you can never be a victim. No matter what condition you find yourself in life, no matter how horrible, you are responsible. You created that." Jane Doe 1 also testified that Masterson raped her at the end of April 2003. Jane Doe 1 said she went over to her friend Bree Schaefer's house, and Bree Schaefer was actually Danny Masterson's assistant. You will hear about her a little bit later, as Danny has been using her to allegedly try and shield assets. She is also the wife of actor Michael Pena. Jane Doe 1 was friends with Bree. She went over to her house about 5 o'clock, and later that evening is when Masterson drugged and her. Masterson allegedly put something in Jane Doe's drink and then threw her in the jacuzzi. This is when Jane Doe 1 said that all she remembers is feeling extremely nauseous, and she was kind of blacking out and also just feeling really, really ill. Masterson carried Jane Doe 1 up the stairs. He put his fingers down her throat and made her vomit. She then was put in the shower by Masterson, who began touching her even though she was saying no. He then brought her into the bedroom when he put her on the bed, and she says she passed out. Then she woke up to the actor on top of her, and that's when he was raping her. She tried to struggle away from him, and that's when he went to his nightstand and pulled out a gun and told her to shut the fuck up. So why not go straight to the police? Well, as I said, Jane Doe 1 was a Scientologist. She was born in Scientology, raised in Scientology. Her whole family was Scientologists, and any ex-Scientologists I know or have even seen on YouTube or something like that, they all say that Scientologists on Scientologist crime should not go into the WOG world, which is the real world. They should not be going to the police and reporting things. Any Scientology on Scientology crime should be dealt with by Scientology. So Jane Doe 1 went and reported Masterson to her ethics officer, as she should. She told her mother. Her mother even wrote to David Miscavige and tried to get Masterson dealt with within Scientology. But Jane Doe 1 was getting nowhere, and even though she knew that this would cause her entire family to disown her, she would have to leave her life, leave her job. She was in her late 20s and she would lose everything if she did this. But despite all of that, she went to the police because she heard about another victim, and she couldn't stand by and let this happen to yet another person. So she then went to the police, to the LAPD. A quote from Jane Doe 1 is as follows. Then one day in May 2004, I'm not going to say specifics. I'll say I was told about a girl named Lily, and it shook me to my core. And I had to say her name because that's what I was told. And that's what I decided to take a step that would destroy my life. I knew Danny wouldn't stop, couldn't stop. I reported my rape to the LAPD in June of 2004. But before that, there was a meeting I had to attend with my rapist. As Danny demanded in April 2004, I was forced by Scientology executive Kirsten Catano to sit across from him in a meeting at a conference table where he claimed he would apologize and make a promise to never repeat such a crime on any woman if he could hear me describe in detail how awful and violent the assault had been for me. I naively believed in the possibility of redemption, and I agreed to speak about the whole ordeal. However, it soon became clear this wasn't real. The defendant, along with his friend Luke Watson, turned the meeting into a mockery. They laughed and treated the situation as a big joke, showing no genuine remorse with no intention to change. The meeting ended with Jane Doe being pressured into signing a non-disclosure agreement and a confidential settlement agreement for $400,000, despite Jane Doe not asking for anything aside from Masterson not doing this again. A lot of ex-Scientologists have talked about how this payment is proof of Masterson's guilt because the Scientology Ethics Committee investigated everything that happened after Jane Doe went to them, and they never ever would have made a Scientologist, never mind a celebrity Scientologist who's the highest of the high, pay another Scientologist if they 100% didn't do what they were accused of doing. And obviously they had this meeting and it was being spoken about openly too. Jane Doe 1 even went through another ordeal with Masterson when he attempted to come at her through her 9-year-old daughter. Danny Masterson ended up going to a friend of his whose son was in the same class as Jane Doe 1's daughter. The kids were selling candy bars, and Masterson ended up purchasing all of the candy bars for a couple of $100 and told the kid, I'll buy all your candy bars if you tell this little 9-year-old girl something. And the something was, tell her mummy's a liar and that Danny Masterson didn't rape her. Of course, her 9-year-old daughter went home and didn't even know what that word meant. This all combined with learning there was another victim, and that's why she gave up her entire life and reported him to the LAPD. On top of the settlement, all the reporting to Scientology and the LAPD, Danny Masterson also put aside a small amount of money so that Jane Doe's daughter, the 9-year-old, could get some Scientology help, training, auditing, so that she could recover from this incident that Danny had inflicted on her. And that was set aside specifically in relation to what he said and everything that happened with Jane Doe 1. When Jane Doe 1 reported her attack to the LAPD, they decided not to pursue charges, which is not uncommon at all. So Jane Doe 1 lost everything. She had to move, start her life over. She had to find a new job, take her kids out of school, and her parents were only allowed to speak to her still because they had donated millions and millions to Scientology. But when everything started happening with the trial in the real world, Jane Doe's mom stopped speaking to her because she didn't want Masterson to be held accountable if it meant Scientology was being exposed and brought up in the media. So Jane Doe 1's mother still to this day does not speak to her, even though she wants Masterson held accountable. She wants him held accountable within Scientology. Another quote from Jane Doe 1 in regards to Danny's circle of friends. Testifying in court was not easy. From day one of his appearance in September 2020, he packed the halls with neighbors and so many people who covered for him. There was a South African man who assaulted me when I was a teen training in Scientology headquarters in Florida. He came to court despite my protests, and he was aware of him. He did what he could to intimidate and harass me. And there was intimidation from the defendant's sister, Alanna Masterson, in the bathroom. Jane Doe 1 also said that she fears retaliation from the Church of Scientology, and she's worried about her 3 children and all of the harassment that she's received, and that's why they are also suing and having a civil case, which we'll talk about in the final chapter. Jane Doe 3, Chrissy Bixler, Masterson's former girlfriend, has told the court Masterson was both physically and emotionally abusive. Recalling a night she allegedly woke up to him raping her. Chrissy B testified that she screamed at Masterson to get off me when she woke up to him assaulting her in 2001. She told jurors she met the actor in 1996 when she was an 18-year-old model who had just moved to LA. Chrissy converted to Scientology for Masterson, and a year into their relationship, she claimed he became sexually aggressive and physically and emotionally abusive, explaining it was normal to wake up to him having sex with her and alleging that the actor once dragged her across the floor by her hair when she refused to sleep with him. Chrissy also spoke about the terror campaign the Church of Scientology subjected her to. As she was taught to do, Chrissy went to the Church of Scientology after the rape in 2001, but she was told that it wasn't possible to rape a girlfriend, and it was her job to give Masterson whatever he wanted, whenever he wanted. She was also told by the ethics officer no crime was committed. Chrissy reported Masterson to the LAPD in 2016. Masterson's defense team again tried to point out inconsistencies between Chrissy B's police interview and the testimony. The Church of Scientology told multiple media outlets that Chrissy B's allegations are categorically untrue. Jane Doe 2 was the final victim to testify, and she described a very, very similar incident to what happened to Jane Doe 1. She talked about going over to Masterson's house in 2003 and him giving her a glass of wine. She said that after the glass of wine, she went into the jacuzzi with him and started to feel very heavy and numb. Masterson then began kissing her and she told him, "We're not going to sleep together." Just like Jane Doe 1, Jane Doe 2 was put in the shower, and that's when Masterson raped her. He then took her into the bedroom and she was pleading with him not to do this, and then Masterson carried on raping her. She said that he was being so violent with her and so rough that she felt like a rag doll and she was doing everything she could not to vomit. Jane Doe 2, just like Jane Doe 1 and 3, was a Scientologist at the time of the attack. She said Masterson was more important than her in the church, prompting her to recontextualize what had happened. She feared the consequences of reporting it to the church, which she said had discouraged her from reporting a previous from an ex-boyfriend. "I was gaslighting myself," she said, comparing Masterson to a predator and stating that she understood it was rape when she finally left the church. A quote from Jane Doe 2, "As an adult woman, you have plenty of time to see these distinctions between someone having affinity for you and someone targeting you as a piece of meat." I could go over examples like this for each of the Jane Does, but I don't want to make this video 5 hours long, so I'm going to use Jane Doe 2 as an example of some of the other evidence and verifications that they used, because yes, they all reported it to Scientology. There's those reports from 20 years ago, and even Jane Doe 1 went to the LAPD in 2004. Jane Doe 2 even brought in 4 witnesses who all said, yes, back in 2003, she told me this happened. And somebody, I'm sure, is going to say, oh, well, maybe it's her friends or family. Maybe they're lying too. The web that you would have to create for all of these people to orchestrate all of them lying for 20 years about something that happened all that time ago, when they didn't even know that they were going to get to go to trial, because individually, each of the charges, it's beyond the statute of limitations, right? So the only reason that they are able to try this is if they try all 3 of them together, because all 3 of them together could end up with a life sentence, and anything that has a life sentence doesn't have a statute of limitations. So in order for Danny Masterson to go to prison, he has to not only be found guilty on one of the charges, he has to be found guilty on at least 2. So if the jury was to come back and say, oh, he's only guilty on Jane Doe 1 because she's the only one that went to the police, way back 20 years ago, then he doesn't go to prison. So there has to be at least 2 of these 3 that end up in a guilty verdict. And again, they have to have 12 people sit and hear all this evidence, and those 12 people have to unanimously decide. So not only once do they have to unanimously decide that yes, this is what occurred, they have to decide twice. So it's 24 votes. So again, I'm going to go back now and talk about Jane Doe 2's witnesses, because even that whole, oh, her family and friends, they could lie for her. Actually, one of the people she brought forward absolutely hates her guts. So it's still actually crazy that this person is doing it, because nobody really knows why, because it's well known that they absolutely can't stand Jane Doe 2 and they've had a huge falling out. So it's very interesting that she still is willing to testify in court over this. Also, I think if you're trying to think like the jury, you could say, oh, well, maybe all these people that they're using as witnesses, a lot of them are ex-Scientologists. Maybe they all have an axe to grind with Scientology. But again, one of Jane Doe's witnesses kind of answers this, because one of the people that Jane Doe brought in as a witness who said, yes, she told me about this back in 2003, this person was not a Scientologist. They've never been a Scientologist. They've never had any experience with Scientology. So it was interesting because pretty much everybody else involved involved in this trial was at one time a Scientologist or still is a Scientologist. So the person who really dislikes Jane Doe 2 but still testified that, yes, she told me this back in 2003. This woman is actually the ex-wife of Giovanni Ribisi, who I'm sure most people know him. He was in Avatar, he was in Sneaky Pete, Friends, he's been in loads of stuff. And he is a Scientologist. He's also very good friends with Danny Masterson. He has been friends with him since they were kids. And Giovanni Ribisi also wrote a letter on behalf of Danny Masterson, which I will talk much more about in chapter 5.
What she was there to testify to was, yes, Jane Doe 2 really did tell me these things at the time when they happened. And I'm here to say what she said. If you are on that jury, there are 4 witnesses for Jane Doe 2. So again, today it was friend Rachel, Scientologist, Jordan Ladd, not a Scientologist. Tomorrow we're going to hear from her mom, former Scientologist, never really was. It's a weird one. I'll get into it more tomorrow. And then ex-wife of Giovanni Ribisi, Scientologist Mariah O'Brien. Now, even though Mariah is not a friend of Jane Doe 2, may or may not still be a Scientologist, I'm not totally sure, she is still going to come and testify that, yeah, we had a dinner. Jane Doe 2 was over at my house. She blurted out this thing that she said Danny had done this to her. And then I basically disconnected from her as a result. 4 witnesses who are going to testify that Jane Doe 2, at the time when this occurred, told me that this had occurred. How as a jury member could you possibly have any reasonable doubt that what Jane Doe 2 is testifying to really occurred when she told all these people?
So after all of the accusations, after all the Jane Does took the stand, all the witnesses, everybody else that was involved, there was Claire Headley, who was an expert witness for Scientology. She took the stand over the course of a day to explain a lot of the Scientology speak to the jury, because again, all 3 of them reported this to Scientology, so they had a lot of Scientology speak in the reports. And Claire was also able to explain to them about the fact that they would never want, like a Scientologist would never want things to be taken into the real world, and that's why all of the women didn't immediately just go to the police. That's why they first went to, the Scientology ethics people. Another expert witness they had went over all of the statistics and all of the myths around SA and what victims are really likely to do, as opposed to what culturally people think happens when something like that goes down, and also how a lot of women cope with it and will try and rationalize it, and how they are much more likely to see their abuser again because that is they're trying to rationalize it. And there's just a lot of other things that really, it's not as cut and dry as you are attacked in this way and you immediately go to the police. They are immediately charged and immediately held accountable, because there's so many cases. I mean, look on the internet, even ones with YouTubers, influencers, actors, they are very, very rarely held accountable. And that goes for everyday people too. It is extremely underreported, and the RAINN statistics, which I will put on the screen, which obviously all numbers, we have to look at how they got them, where they got them. These are a few years old, but you can generally get an idea from it how underreported and absolutely how unlikely it is for false reporting, and how unlikely it is for an actual person who commits SA to go to prison, because it is very, very unlikely for that to happen. In the first trial, there was another victim named Trisha V who testified about also being raped by Danny Masterson. Trisha V did not testify in the second trial. Another woman, however, did. Her name was Kathleen, and she was from Canada.
So Kathleen, we're just going to call her Kathleen J, because that's how she's identified herself in court. Kathleen J is the woman who was raped by Danny Masterson in 2000 at a wrap party for a movie in Toronto, Canada. I will not go through the details of her testimony. It was powerful. I'm pretty sure I saw the judge wiping away tears. I know I was. It was devastating testimony.
When she was working on a movie in Toronto, she went to the wrap party and was invited to another wrap party that was going on in the same hotel. This wrap party was for Dracula 2000. Danny Masterson was at that party as he was in Dracula 2000. That night, Kathleen was raped by Danny Masterson.
Here's the next part of the testimony that I highlight. By the time you left the hotel, did you know that you had been raped by Danny Masterson? And she said, well, I didn't leave the hotel that night. And there was a back and forth between her and Cohen. It's like, yeah, but by the time you left the hotel, did you know that you'd been raped by Danny Masterson? And she goes, well, yes, but I did not know his last name and I did not know who he was.
But at the time, she had no idea who Danny Masterson was. She didn't even know his last name. All she knew was that she was raped by someone named Danny.
All she knew was that she went to a wrap party for a different movie. She was then invited to an after party for Dracula 2000, and she happened to meet this guy named Danny who raped her.
Years later, she was sent a copy of the movie on DVD, and when she watched Dracula 2000, she saw the man who raped her. Down the road, she had a private phone call with Scientology reporter Tony Ortega, who then published her story without her permission.
But it became evident at this point in the testimony that the article Tony Ortega published about his phone conversation with Kathleen that he had with her about the attack was published without her consent and without her permission.
Kathleen then went to the police over the incident. After her story being put out in the media and going to the police, she was then asked to testify in the second trial. She took to the stand and told the jury about the night in Toronto where Masterson attacked her. This was a very, very tough chapter to get through, so we are going to go on and speak about the victim impact statements next chapter, and then chapter 5 we are going to go into the sentencing and also all of the letters and a big section on Ashton and Mila and what ended up happening with them and the backlash they received for not only their letters but for their horrendous apology video. When it came to the end of the trial, after the closing arguments, the jury then went into deliberation. Unlike my last video, which discussed the murder trial, this case had a much longer deliberation and it went on for over 6 days. Something that is very important to mention here is that in order for Danny Masterson to go to prison, the jury had to unanimously find him guilty on at least 2 of the 3 charges. So not only did they have to return 12 votes for guilty, they had to return 24 votes as each of the cases was looked at differently. So all 3 cases were reviewed separately, and if the jury returned just 1 guilty verdict, he would have got off. And it's also very important to know that the jury didn't know this going into deliberation. They didn't know that if they came back with just 1 guilty verdict, that this basically would have been for nothing. The jury unanimously agreed on 2 of the cases, Jane Doe 1 and Jane Doe 2. The third charge for Danny Masterson's former girlfriend, Chrissy Bixler, was deadlocked and the jury could not agree, but the final vote was 8-4 in favor of conviction. As I mentioned earlier, he did have to be found guilty on 2 counts, and because that parameter was satisfied, then the only thing left to do was to sentence him for his crimes. When they returned to court for the sentencing in September 2023, the judge actually allowed the 3 victims to read impact statements before she announced what Danny Masterson's sentence was going to be. I want to share some small segments from the impact statements because they are very powerful, and I have linked the entire statements in the sources below. As most regular viewers will know, I always list all my sources in the pinned comments, and there may actually start to be a Google Doc because, especially this case, there was a lot of sources needed. Again, I really implore you to read these if you have the time. We're going to go in descending order. So to start with Jane Doe 3, Chrissy Bixler. The judge very kindly allowed Jane Doe 3 to read her impact statement because she actually wasn't entitled to, because her account was hung. Some trials when this has happened, like recently with Harvey Weinstein, they actually didn't allow any of his victims who a mistrial was declared to read their statements. Jane Doe 3's statement speaks about her 6-year relationship with Masterson and the cycle of abuse that she endured. She spoke about Masterson asking her to tell him very detailed accounts of the trauma she had been through in her life. Scientology calls this finding someone's ruins. Once Danny Masterson found these ruins, she was trapped in the relationship with him, and he would reenact all of the traumatic experiences. Jane Doe 2, in her impact statement, she spoke about how she came forward about a year before the Me Too movement and how she found out there were other victims. She spoke about Danny's DJ name, DJ Donkey Punch, which, if you don't know what that is, it's just another thing that was very reminiscent of his crimes.
Speaking of which, I mentioned the donkey punch.
Oh, yeah.
How does that become your DJ name? Just because you can't believe people are going to have to say it?
Yeah, just because it was like, oh, I wonder if we can get this in the New York Times, and we did. And it was just, I started DJing in 97, 98, and
right.
you don't want to be like DJ Danny Masterson. That just sounds not good. So you sort of all come up with something that's kind of funny.
Right.
And mine was DJ Donkey Punch, which is a great name.
Uh-huh.
But this is also kind of like before the world of the internet and where the Facebooks and the Twitter and the whole thing, where everybody knows what everything means.
Right, you can't.
So for years,
nobody knows.
You know, it'd be like, and Danny Masterson, aka DJ Donkey Punch,
ex-cons,
playing, this isn't like
And if you need more specifics, I would say look it up, but make sure when you look it up, you're looking it up on incognito mode for sure. And Jane Doe 2 spoke a lot about the 7 years that she was terrorized and harassed by Scientology and how her privacy was invaded. This is basically the past 7 years that investigation and trial has been going on. I do want to read a short quote from Jane Doe 2's letter. Obviously, all 3 statements were incredibly powerful, but this section in particular just was very well written. Jane Doe 2 said, "When you raped me, you stole from me. This is what rape is, a theft of spirit. You disfigured my life. You stole some crucial pieces of my self-worth and lessened my capacity for joy. You made every part of me turn on myself. Worst of all, for so many years after the rape, deformed my ability to trust others and to discern danger or goodness appropriately. Since life was now in the prism of hatred, shame, and fear, you forced me into that night, and you were someone in my community who I peripherally knew, that my close friends vouched for. Danny is such a great guy, they said. This stolen trust part is the most crippling because now my internal gauge was broken." A little bit later in the statement, she says, "You relish in hurting women. It is your addiction. It is, without question, your favorite thing to do. You've lived your life behind a mask as 2 people, but the real one sits here now for its reckoning. It never once dawned on you that you'd be held accountable. You've glided easily through your life as a depraved criminal without consequence for so long that you thought not only did the law not apply to you, but that karma had no eye on you either." And finally, Jane Doe 1's statement. As discussed in the trial chapter 20 years ago, Jane Doe 1, Jen B, did report her attack to Scientology and then to the police when she learned of another victim. Jen B explains in detail what happened when she reported Masterson to Scientology shortly after the attack, and also how awful Masterson was when Scientology was investigating the incident. She goes into detail about Scientology getting Masterson to pay her $400,000 to settle the issue and prevent her from speaking out, essentially buying her silence. Because as many former Scientologists have stated, Scientology was protecting itself. Scientology clearly confirmed that what Jen B stated Danny Masterson did happen, because according to over a dozen former Scientologists, there is no way they would have made Masterson, a celebrity in high standing with Scientology, pay $400,000 to another Scientologist who had made these claims. They would only do so if they were true, if their investigation revealed that that's what happened. She also discussed losing her family and how her life was destroyed. Masterson involved her 9-year-old daughter, which we discussed earlier, and he also put aside some money for her daughter to get help via Scientology because of how his actions affected the child. Jane Doe 1 was also very good friends with Lisa Marie Presley, and she told Lisa about the attack back after it happened. Masterson actually threatened Jane Doe 1 and told her, "You're not going to tell Lisa about this," as Lisa Marie Presley was of course a famous Scientologist and the daughter of Elvis and Priscilla Presley. Lisa Marie was born into Scientology as her mum joined Scientology after her father's death. Lisa Marie left Scientology in 2014, although since 2008 she had been experiencing growing discontent with Scientology. Lisa Marie Presley was going to testify in the trial on behalf of Jane Doe 1, but sadly passed away before she could. After being found guilty, Danny Masterson was immediately handcuffed and remanded into custody. His family went straight to work in getting letters for Masterson and to try and sway the judge into leniency. They were trying to sway the judge into letting Danny serve his 2 sentences concurrently, which would mean if he was sentenced to 15 years for each, he would serve the sentences at the same time, and he would get out in 15 years. The alternative is to run the sentences consecutively, and Masterson would serve one 15-year sentence followed by another 15-year sentence, making his sentence 30 years behind bars for both guilty verdicts. But much more on this later, because a lot of people have been falsely reporting what his sentence ended up being. Masterson's family themselves wrote letters and sought out prominent Scientologists and other celebrities. In the end, over 50 letters were sent to the judge, filled with glowing statements about Masterson. These letters were written by all of Danny's siblings, Chris, Jordan, Alanna, and Will, but there are many other celebrities who wrote letters. One quick thing before we get into the Ashton and Mila of the whole thing is I wanted to briefly mention here Danny Masterson's brother Chris, as I wasn't quite sure where else to put it, but Chris Masterson also has a terrible, terrible reputation in Hollywood, and there's a lot of stories that circulate about him and how he treats women, especially in his relationship with Danny's co-star Laura Prepon, who, as we know, ended up converting to Scientology, but she has actually ended up leaving Scientology. She did an interview in 2019 that she had left over 5 years ago, but there's always been a lot of rumors about Chris just treating Laura awfully. Of the people who wrote letters, Ashton Kutcher and Mila Kunis were absolutely the most famous, but there was also letters written by Deborah Jo Rupp and Kurtwood Smith, who were 2 actors from That 70s Show who played Mr. and Mrs. Foreman. Giovanni Ribisi, who was in Avatar, he also has known Danny since he was a child. He wrote a letter. Billy Baldwin, whose wife is sisters with Bijou Phillips, Danny Masterson's wife, he wrote a letter. I do also believe that there was another actor that wrote a letter, but when there was some backlash recently for another trial about celebrities writing letter, I believe this actor pulled his letter out, and I will explain why. But this actor is Ethan Suplee. Danny Masterson has quite a relationship with him, and he's always getting him into projects because he's someone that Danny wants to put in a lot of shows and things like that. Like when he was on the ranch and Danny got fired from the ranch, he wanted Ethan Suplee to stay on as he was able to still recruit for Scientology.
Fellas, hey, there. Oh, so whatever you're heard it in the police chase. Oh shit.
No, fuck this. You're gonna take him, you're taking me too.
Yeah, you're taking me too. I mean, I guess I can.
They don't really care who goes in that direction.
Ethan Suplee was in My Name is Earl and Varsity Blues is probably what most people would know him from. It seems obvious that he originally penned a letter because there's court documents that actually have small excerpts of his letter. They're just little quotes from them. And then whenever you go to the actual packet that contains all the letters, there is no letter from Ethan Suplee. So it seems as though either last minute or maybe he found out the letters were going to be released, or he asked his lawyer about it and he ended up pulling his letter. It seems as though when Danny Masterson's lawyers went to people to ask them to write these letters, they had originally requested that the judge enter these letters under seal, which is what they probably told people, which means the public would never have been able to see the letters. But the judge refused to enter them under seal. So when Danny Masterson's lawyer and Masterson were obtaining the letters, they were likely telling people, oh, don't worry, we're entering it under seal, not knowing that the judge was going to deny that. And obviously most people took their word for it, which is wild that they didn't check with their own lawyers or PR people. And it's especially wild that people like Ashton and Mila didn't check with their own lawyers and PR people, because people like Ashton and Mila, they have so many lawyers and PR people that are working for them already. So it's just wild that they wouldn't have even sent an email or had a meeting and asked them about sending the letters and if they were going to come out.
But Danny and his friends and his family and the Scientologists have a lot of blackmail on Ashton. And I'm not even, I can't sit before you and say, oh, they threatened him. I don't think they threatened him. Ashton is two peas in a pod with Danny. And I gotta say, in a vacuum, I agree with you. You can't really blame a guy for wanting to, help throw his friend a little bit of a bone. But that's in a vacuum. If I'm Ashton Kutcher, I'm like, come on. You think me writing a nice letter to the judge is gonna have an impact? I'm not touching this with a 10-foot pole. The problem is the attorneys, to the best of my understanding and to the best of my knowledge, the attorneys basically gave all these people false confidence that their letters would never see the light of day. And honestly, if I'm Ashton and I think that's true, okay, fine, I might send a letter. If one of my best friend's family is begging me to do it and I think it's never gonna see the light of day, I might do it. But I don't know, man. It's like, that is rolling the dice. Like, you really think this letter's never going to see the light of day. But here's how I know that they thought that. I was in the courtroom for the sentencing, and the judge basically gave a little speech to the defense attorneys. It's like, I received your motion, filed it under seal, but we're not accepting it under seal. I've already told you almost nothing in my courtroom, barred for some personal safety reasons. And so for the attorneys to file it under seal like that means they told everyone that's what was going to happen, and everyone's like, oh great, it'll never see the light of day.
If you'd like to read the entire letter that Mila and Ashton wrote, they wrote one each individually, then I've linked them down below, and I definitely recommend you read them just to get an idea of what they said. But we're going to discuss those letters a lot more after I discuss the sentencing, because the sentencing happened and then obviously the letters were released to the public, and that's when everything went crazy for Ashton and Mila. But we will discuss Ashton and Mila a lot after the sentencing. Despite all the letter writing, Danny Masterson was sentenced to life in prison with no eligibility for parole for 30 years. A lot of people have been reporting this sentence as 30 years, but it's only when he becomes eligible for parole. There's no guarantee that he will get it. So he technically got 15 years without parole to life for both Jane Doe 1 and Jane Doe 2. The letters were hoping his sentence again would run consecutively rather than concurrently. So if he gets paroled, the first time he will ever be eligible, he will be in his 70s. That's best case scenario. But he could go and ask to be paroled and be denied 15 times, and he could never get out of prison, but he can't even ask for 30 years. When the letters were released, Ashton Kutcher and Mila Kunis took an absolute battering on social media. A key point I don't see mentioned a lot is the fact that Ashton Kutcher Mila Kunis wrote these letters after Danny Masterson had been found guilty. Most people, including a number of ex-Scientologists, have said that Ashton Kutcher especially probably wrote these letters because of how much dirt Scientology has on him. Both Mila and Ashton threw their reputations away when these letters were released, as they have constantly claimed to be on the side of victims, when these letters showed they were the absolute opposite of what they were claiming. The words chosen in these letters, especially by Ashton, are so carefully chosen to try and contradict the victims' stories. They made constant reference to Danny being so against drugs and being around anyone that did drugs whenever that is one of the things he was accused of, was drugging his victims.
And probably someone on the Scientology side of the team put together a framework for what notes everyone should be hitting in their letters. And that's why almost all the letters talk about Danny was so against drugs. Danny was so against drugs. It's a weird thing to be mentioned in 50 letters.
Yeah, it was very repetitive at times. It was.
And the problem with mentioning that, and, you know, because in Ashton's video, he's like, it wasn't meant to undermine the testimony of the Jane Does. I'm sorry. Part of the entire case is that Danny drugged all these women. And you're going to write a letter, Danny hated drugs. Danny didn't even want to be friends with people who took drugs. That's a total lie. Jimmy DeBello was one of Ashton and Danny's closest friends, who's an absolute out of his mind cokehead all the time. Like the fact that he wouldn't even associate with people who took drugs is not true. Mila Kunis herself, when she was with Macaulay Culkin, was on a mountain of drugs. I've heard so many stories from people who were at parties at Marilyn Manson's house and this place. I mean, insane. So you have Mila, who herself has been a close friend of Danny for 20 plus years or whatever, who's taken tons of drugs, being, oh, Danny would never associate with anyone who took drugs. Like, they're lying in their letters. And I think that's one of the reasons he's taking so much flack, is it was so over the top. It was so over the top and stacked with lies. Yeah.
Mila and Ashton also know all of the women, especially Ashton. He has had close relationships with the women, especially Chrissy Bixler, who he knew extremely well. And it's been reported upon that when Ashton Kutcher found out about the accusations against Masterson, particularly the Chrissy Bixler one, that Ashton's response was, "That bitch." After the backlash on social media, Ashton and Mila released a response in the form of a video, and I'm sure anyone who watches The Boys found this quite comical, as last season, Ashton and Mila were in an episode of The Boys and played themselves in a spoof of celebrities all singing Imagine on social media and just kind of taking the piss out of celebrities and their idiocy online sometimes, and yet here they find themselves in idiocy online for their own terrible actions. Ashton and Mila picked the exact same spot in their house to shoot the apology video that they shot the little recorded video for The Boys, which probably was the only location in their house that didn't show off their enormous mansion, so they probably wanted to keep it low-key for an apology video.
These supervillain attacks, they've affected everyone. Doesn't matter who you are, where you're from. We're all in this together. And together, we can imagine a better world. Imagine there's no heaven. Imagine all the people.
If Ashton and Mila thought the letters were bad, they made things 10 times worse with the apology video.
We are aware of the pain that has been caused by the character letters that we wrote on behalf of Danny Masterson.
We support victims. We have done this historically through our work and will continue to do so in the future.
A couple months ago, Danny's family reached out to us and they asked us to write character letters to represent the person that we knew for 25 years so that the judge could take that into full consideration relative to the sentencing.
The letters were not written to question the legitimacy of the judicial system or the validity of the jury's ruling.
They were intended for the judge to read and not to undermine the testimony of the victims or re-traumatize them in any way. We would never want to do that. And we're sorry if that has taken place.
Our heart goes out to every single person who's ever been a victim of sexual assault, sexual abuse, or rape.
The video was received horrendously, and the entire video had a very hollow feel to it. They didn't say anything about the actual victims. They say in the video that they believe victims in general, which obviously isn't true based on their actions. And they also ended the video with a very generic, our heart goes out to anyone who's been the victim of SA. But it really would have made the world of difference if they had actually just spoken to either the three women by calling them their names, Jen, Nisha, and Chrissy, as they'd already identified themselves in the media by this time. It would have made a lot of difference if they just said, we're sorry that we hurt Jen, Nisha, and Chrissy, and of course we would believe them. When this was all going on, Chrissy Bixler put out 2 stories on her Instagram. One was directed at Ashton and one was directed at Mila. In Mila's story, she says that she believes Mila was put through some terrible things on the set of that 70s show, and she also references an incident in Toronto that involved Mila and Danny Masterson. Nobody seems to know what this incident was, but judging by how Chrissy phrased it, it seems to have been something horrendous. The story directed at Ashton called Ashton out for being just as sick as his mentor, Danny Masterson. Chrissy referenced an incident she knew about as she was dating Danny at the time. This is way back 25 years ago. Ashton Kutcher was picking up his date, Ashley Elleron, to go to an Emmys after party, and Ashton Kutcher claims he was running late, and when he got to Ashley's house, he knocked on the door, got no answer, tried to open the door, couldn't get in, looked through the window, saw what he thought was red wine stains on the floor, and left. Ashley, unfortunately, was the victim of the Hollywood Ripper, and he had taken her life that night. That was why she didn't answer the door.
What really happened is Ashton Kutcher showed up to the house to pick Ashley Elleron up for her date. He opened the door, he walked into the house. You could not see the body on the floor from the entryway to the house. He walked into the house, he looked over to the area where he saw her body lying on the floor. She was stabbed like 47 times, covered in blood, freaked out, left the house, and for about the next hour, sat in his car outside the house, calling various members of his team for advice on what the hell to do. And his team advised him that he should not call the police. He should not be the one to report this. It should not be known that he was there. He doesn't want to be the one who discovered the body. That 70s show was only a couple years old at this point. Ashton Kutcher was not a household name. They essentially said, this is all you'll be known for. People will think you did it, all this kind of stuff. This will be what people think of when they think of Ashton Kutcher. You don't want that. Go to the party. Go to the party that you were picking Ashley up to take her with you to. Go to the party and then go home. Now, I'm not making any representations that these are the exact words that were spoken. I'm not even naming the members of Ashton's team that he called. There's someone else that he called. Danny Masterson. He called frickin' Danny Masterson. That's how close these guys were. In fact, the night before Ashley was killed, Ashton and Danny and some other people from that 70s show were hanging out at Ashley's house.
Over the years, Ashton has definitely had a very, very good PR team, and they have been able to put him out as a kind of himbo in the early and mid 2000s, and now he's been transformed into this investor in startups like Airbnb, Uber, and WeWork. And if you want to know how problematic WeWork is, there are a ton of videos about WeWork and its founder on my channel, and Kutcher even features in some of them. Kutcher is also now the founder of a non-profit called Thorn, which he claims helps find child predators, and that's what I want to talk about first, and then we'll discuss more of the sketchy Ashton Kutcher stories, Scientology ties, all the old interviews, and a lot of Hollywood rumors that have existed about Ashton Kutcher and Mila Kunis. So Thorn was originally started by Kutcher and Demi Moore, who were married at the time. When Ashton Kutcher and Demi Moore divorced, Kutcher changed the name of the foundation, as it was originally called DNA Foundation, which stood for Demi and Ashton Foundation, and they changed the name obviously to Thorn. Ashton Kutcher treated Demi Moore terribly. If you want to know more about that, I would really suggest reading Demi Moore's book. When it comes to Thorn, in a nutshell, it sounds great, right? The software is supposed to take regular people's photos in places, scan them, and try and compare them to images that child pedos take and share. So it's supposed to then be able to compare the two, and then you're able to locate where the picture of the child was taken, so that then they can go and save the child and arrest the predator. But Thorn is a lot more complicated than that. I could do a video just on Thorn itself because the rabbit hole is very deep, but I don't want to get too sidetracked in this video. It's definitely not what it is painting itself to be in the press. I've linked a very good article on it below. It does have a paywall, but the link that I have used, you should be able to read it for free. And again, if it's something that you want me to cover, let me know in the comments. The fact that Ashton Kutcher is the face of it is also seemingly counterproductive. I mean, this may be conspiracy time. Is that on purpose, as if it's so distracting that an A-list celebrity, maybe former A-list after what's happened with Danny Masterson, but people really get drawn in by the whole celebrity thing. Even the European Data Protection Supervisor, Wojciech Rafalski, was even last month quoted as saying, whilst one can be a movie star to advocate a good cause, it is a thorny problem when stakeholders hide behind the notion of civil society, therefore misleading the public, even if unintentionally. The last thing I will say about Thorn is that in 2021, Thorn raised $18 million. They ended up using 14 million of those dollars to pay employees. There are about a dozen people in Thorn that make over 6 figures, and I also am sharing on the screen the 2021 990 filing, so you can see all of what people in there are being paid. It seems a lot if you're working in a charity, and again, it's just something that I wanted to draw your attention to. So let me know what you think about that down in the comments. So now we're moving into our little Hollywood gossip section. This, obviously, I don't have any black and white proof that most of this stuff is true, so most of it is alleged. If you want a lot of Ashton Kutcher dirt regarding relationships, diva behavior, I would go and listen to the podcast Beyond the Blinds. Episode 62 is an Ashton Kutcher one, and they also have episodes on Maqsterson, Wilder Valderrama, and a lot of other people. There have always been a lot of questionable stories about Ashton Kutcher, and the company he keeps certainly doesn't help with that. Mainly Danny Masterson and Wilmer Valderrama. Many of the past interviews have been brought up again after the letter apology controversy, and I have played some of those previously, like the Rosie O'Donnell one, and I'll put a few more in here as well.
Not only do I get to work with our beautiful, sexy, hot next guest on That 70s Show, but I'm lucky enough to play her boyfriend, so I get to make out with her. Okay, a very talented, hot, smart, and beautiful Mila Kunis.
So I knew I was gonna go, so I went to semi-formal with a friend of mine, so that was kind of like my prom.
Sure.
So then after work on a Friday, Danny Masterson, who plays Hyde, we went to a club, like him and the whole cast, and everybody went to a club.
Old enough to get in?
Okay, and my name and my ideas, I'm not, but the person is. My parents know it's okay.
Young Hollywood.
So here's my story. So Danny was my first dance, and that was my prom. It was at Club Blue. I think that's what it was.
Okay.
On Hollywood, and that was my prom night.
It's an exciting story.
It was
now, you have pictures of your graduation?
Free movie, cheaper by the dozen.
She's one of the girls that we're all waiting for to turn 18, along with the Olsen twins.
There was
as they celebrate the filming of the landmark one.
My name is Mila Kunis, and I'm from That 70s Show, and you're watching In the Crease TV.
Kutcher, and I'm from That 70 Show TV, That 70 Show too. Yeah. And the reason I'm doing this is not because I think Indecrease is good, but because Josh told me to be able to sit on my lap and like, it feels good.
Exception we did with Lipnicki that you could play Yambo if you're under, he was under like 5'3" and he was like, under 10 or something. But I don't know, if you're only 17, I don't know if you can play Yambo.
Could be a problem. I can lie and say I'm 18, that make you feel better?
Are you gonna, okay, listen, I gotta mention this. Is this big for you?
Oh,
This is
God.
this is the Stuff magazine.
Yeah.
Did you enjoy posing?
Thanks.
Huh?
Did I enjoy posing?
What'd you tell him? You're gonna be 25 pretty soon?
Okay, look,
Just come on.
Ashton Kutcher has a huge pattern of cheating. Pretty much every woman he's been with, from Brittany Murphy, Taryn Manning, Lindsay Lohan, January Jones. These are obviously based on reports and blind items. Ashton Kutcher allegedly had a one-night stand with Lindsay Lohan before she was 18. And then after that, that's when she started dating Wilder Valderrama. When it comes to Mila Kunis, again, I think there was a lot of inappropriate stuff on set. And the fact that she was a literal child when she was cast, there's probably a lot of stuff that she went through on that 70s show set, because I cannot imagine with Danny Masterson, Wilmer Valderrama, and Ashton Kutcher. They all have terrible reputations, and also that 70s show had a reputation for being a cast and a behind the scenes atmosphere that was just party, drinking, and, drugs, even though apparently Danny Masterson has never touched a drug in his life. I think a lot of people were really let down by Ashton and Mila, and Mila in particular, because she's always come across very well on camera. So unless you really dig, you don't see a lot of the reports about her behavior behind the scenes. And she even just last year did a movie called Luckiest Girl Alive that's on Netflix, where the main character that she played was R-worded multiple times at a party in high school, and Mila was playing the grown-up version of her in her late 30s, and she was still dealing with the trauma of that event many years later. She also produced that movie, and she spoke out in a lot of interviews about how this was something that was really important to talk about, and how a lot of women had gone through this sort of thing. And then just to see this letter, it just kind of negates everything that she said.
I'm very curious now how much they knew about him. Did they know all of this? Because they don't seem necessarily surprised, and they seemed more than willing to write these glowing letters that seem like fucking 5-star Yelp reviews of this guy. Even with all of this evidence of the sexual abuse, they're still calling him an outstanding role model, an older brother figure. Holy shit. I understand they've been friends for 2 decades, so I guess when Danny Masterson's family reached out to request that they write a letter, gushing grannies over how cool Danny Masterson is, they should have said no. They should have just hard rejected that on the spot. Of course, I'm not a lawyer, I haven't passed the bar, but I don't think this is some kind of obligation they had to fulfill here, because there were other people that didn't write letters about Danny Masterson. But let's assume they were forced to. You can still say, I was one of Danny Masterson's best friends. I didn't know this side of him. I didn't know he was an evil person, so I don't feel comfortable saying anything nice about my experience with him. Full stop. That could just be the end of it.
A couple months ago, Danny's family reached out to us, and they asked us to write character letters to represent the person that we knew for 25 years, so that the judge could take that into full consideration relative to the sentencing.
How rotted and corrupt is the brain of a Hollywood drone? A Hollywood fucking clout zombie. I can't even begin to try and process how their noodles work. How can you just say that so nonchalant, like it's not a big deal and not just fucking diabolical? They knowingly wrote these character letters to give the judge a full understanding of the situation to consider when giving his sentencing to Danny Masterson. So they knew that this was going to be used to try and get lighter sentencing for a man who committed heinous crimes. How do you sleep at night like that? After doing that, I don't get it. A lot of people wrote letters, of course, it's not just these two, but these two are the most public figures about it. But I imagine they called anyone that ever even crossed Danny Masterson's path, like, hey, it's me.
Kunis and Kutcher really destroyed their relationship with the public. Ashton Kutcher has now stepped down as the chairman of Thorn over the entire controversy. I'd love to know what their relationship is like with Danny Masterson now, if they're still standing by him. I'm sure they are, because they wrote letters after he'd been convicted of this horrendous crime. So I can't imagine if it didn't hit them then, why would it hit them now? But something that it did hit recently was their wallet, because a lot of people won't watch their stuff anymore. But what I'm particularly referencing is the fact that Danny Masterson has cost them millions of dollars recently. When it came to the negotiations of that 70s show's streaming rights, all the streaming giants were going back and forth to purchase all 8 seasons of that 70s show. When a show is sold like this to streaming, or usually it's for syndication on those channels like TBS, TNT, the stars of the show, the writers, directors, all these people get a payout. And especially people like Ashton Kutcher and Mila Kunis, who were on the show, well, nearly the entire time, Mila certainly was, they would be netting millions of dollars, especially for a 200 episode show. They would be getting likely tens of millions of dollars. But when everything started coming out about Danny Masterson, it all fell through, because obviously no streaming giant are going to want to be the company that's paying tens of millions of dollars to Danny Masterson when he's on trial for the crimes he's on trial for. So it was completely dropped, and that's why there isn't a streaming service that has that 70s show. Again, they both, Ashton and Mila, had great PR. And I think if you polled most general people, most general audiences who go to the movies and watch popular TV, most, especially fellow millennials, would have said they liked Ashton Kutcher and certainly Mila Kunis. Sure, there have always been rumors about both of their diva behavior and both of their cheating, and Ashton Kutcher had a terrible reputation when it came to women, but most people either didn't know that or weren't too bothered by it because they liked their movies and their shows. But now they are absolutely ruined. Sure, some people will still watch their movies and shows, and people who aren't really on the internet a lot won't know about most of this stuff, so they'll continue. And of course, they're obviously super rich, super loaded, but there are many, many, many people who are absolutely done with them. I think Christina Ricci summed it up really well after everything kicked off with Ashton and Mila. Christina Ricci came out with a great story that kind of surmised everything, and she is so problem free, never gets involved, very low key, but she's seen everything. She's been in the industry since she was a child, so it is particularly, I think, strong that she's come out and said this. So Christina Ricci's story said, "So sometimes people we loved and admired do horrible things. They might not do these things to us, and we only know who they were to us, but that doesn't mean they didn't do the horrible things. And to discredit the abused is a crime. People we know as awesome guys can be predators and abusers. It's tough to accept, but we have to. If we say we support victims, women, children, men, boys, then we must be able to take this stance. Unfortunately, I've known a lot of awesome guys who were lovely to me, but have been proven to be abusers privately. I've also had personal experience with this. Believe victims. It's not easy to come forward. It's not easy to get a conviction." Over the course of the investigation and the trial, even more women came forward claiming they were victims of Danny Masterson. At the time of this recording, there's over 17 women who have come forward in some form. And if that's the amount of people who have come forward and are known, you can only imagine how many victims there are out there. The majority of these women who've gone into any detail about what happened to them have eerily similar stories to one another, and also the 3 Jane Does who were in the trial. Couple all that together with the fact that the jury heard everything, heard all the evidence, and they not only convicted him once but convicted him twice. Of course, the Church of Scientology has claimed that this whole thing is being orchestrated by Leah Remini for her show and just for attention, and it just factually cannot be true, because when even the 3 Jane Does, never mind anyone else, first reported their crimes to Scientology, Leah Remini was still a Scientologist. And there would have to be some either crazy time travel, or this would have had to have been some massively orchestrated thing that goes back 20 years, and Leah Remini would have had to have been pretending the whole time too, because she really hasn't been out of Scientology that long. She was in Scientology for nearly her entire life. There's still an ongoing civil trial, and that was kind of on pause while the criminal trial was taking place. So now that that's happened and the sentencing has happened, the civil trial will go forward. The civil trial isn't actually anything to do with the criminal trial and the actual accusations that the Jane Does had. A lot of people think civil trial, oh, they're just using whatever happened in the criminal trial and trying to get money, but that's actually not the case at all. The civil trial is against Danny Masterson and the Church of Scientology, and it's for all the harassment that has occurred over the past 7 years, because if you remember, they have been enduring all of this harassment from Scientology since 2017, when Chrissy Bixler came forward along with another woman, and they spoke to Leah Remini and they interviewed her on Scientology the Aftermath. They weren't allowed to actually air that episode until 2019, but everything did start in 2017, and Scientology has done some truly awful things to them. They make their lives hell. They're following them constantly. They've killed multiple pets, and it's just abhorrent behavior. Of course, we'll have to see how things turn out for Ashton Kutcher and Mila Kunis. Everything is still very fresh, and Ashton Kutcher has obviously just stepped down from Thorn, so we'll see what happens to them. I really think they have done irreparable damage to their reputations, but it just depends how many people really are aware of this and how many people stay staunch in their convictions about not supporting any of their projects after this whole thing. I am thinking about maybe doing a video on the cast of That 70s Show as a whole, because some of the stuff that I found out over the course of doing research for this video is absolutely wild. I couldn't fit all the Danny Masterson things in this video, otherwise it would be like 5 hours long. I could do maybe a part 2 with the civil trial and include some of that stuff, but there is a lot of also awful stuff out there about a lot of the cast members of that show. So if it's something you're interested in, let me know down below. But there is still a lot to come for this case. And just as I was getting to the end of my research, I mean, the research takes up primarily most of my time with these videos. It's the editing and recording is a small part compared to that. But there was something that happened that made a lot of people go, hang on a minute, because Danny Masterson and Bijou Phillips announced last month that they are going to divorce. And a lot of people straight away thought, oh, this is him shielding assets, shielding cash, and that certainly could be the case. I think we're going to be able to pretty much figure out quite quickly if that is the case, if they're doing it just to, stop lots of money being taken off him and assets, or if it is actually just they're getting divorced and maybe there was like a deal that she stayed with him or he stayed with her. I'm sure she stayed with him until the end of the trial. But basically, if we see a very quick divorce, then I think that will point towards, oh, this is just for saving face and saving money, because if it gets all drawn out and it's complicated, that means that it's probably for real. So I'll definitely be keeping an eye what's going on there. It is very important to point out though that he has kind of already done this, or at least started to shield assets and real estate and things like that, because when he was first accused, like way back in 2017, 2018, 2019, he actually transferred a lot of real estate and other little stakes in businesses he had to Bree Schaefer. And I'm sure you'll remember from the trial chapter that Bree Schaefer, she is actually an actress, and she's married to Michael Pena too, who is from the Ant-Man movie. I'm sure a lot of people know his face. And she used to be Danny Masterson's assistant, and she was very well known to the Jane Does, and it very much allegedly seems as though Bree Schaefer was quite involved in all the Danny Masterson thing and all the cleanup and things like that, because she is extremely loyal to him and has been, you know, either working for him or involved in some way with him for over 25 years. There's a lot of places that Danny has assets that are known, so I can't imagine the ones that are unknown. You know, he had a lot of investments in real estate. A lot of that has been transferred to Bree Schaefer. He even had a lot of money in a PokerStars account, which I could tell you for a fact back in the day. So I hope they're looking into all sorts of poker accounts, because he was a really big poker player, and certainly when it's been allowed to be played online again, I'm sure he's gone straight back to it. He also owned a stake in Card magazine, which is a poker magazine. So all things like that. There's lots of investments too in Bitcoin and, you know, all those Ashton Kutcher sort of Uber and things. I'm sure he's got involved in some of those. So it will be really interesting to see what happens to all of that and how it's divided up in the divorce, and then to see what happens with the civil trial. Hi guys, Editing Ash and Editing G here. We are, of course, just literally finishing the editing of this video, and there's news. So apparently, Aaron Smith-Levin reported this. Danny Masterson has been declared a suppressive person, which if you know anything about Scientology, you know that's a really big deal. If someone is declared a suppressive person, all Scientologists are supposed to completely cut them off, which Danny Masterson's entire family, his mom, his siblings, his wife, his kid, they are all Scientologists. And for example, his two younger siblings, Alanna and Jordan, their dad was declared a suppressive person, and they cut him off, changed their last name from his to Masterson, and never spoke to him again. So if that is what's going to happen with Danny, it's going to be very interesting to see how it all plays out, because you look at someone like Tom Cruise. When Katie Holmes was declared, Tom had nothing to do with Surrey after that, because she is entangled with Katie, who is a suppressive person. So by that logic, if Danny's declared a suppressive person, then really that should mean his daughter isn't allowed to visit with him and stuff. But I don't see his family going down without a fight, because they're very loyal to him. They were in court every single day. A lot of people who've been talking about this have said it's only been verbally said that he's a suppressive person, which in Scientology they have to write things down for it to be real. And also it may just be to appease big donors, because a lot of those Scientologists that write big checks are probably looking at this and being like, David Miscavige, what's going on, because this is making Scientology look terrible. So it may just be to try and appease them. But we'll keep an eye on what's going on, and it's definitely going to be interesting to see what happens with this and also the divorce, because there's little bits and pieces that have been coming out that make it seem like maybe it isn't all just for show to hide assets. So we'll have to see what happens there too. This trial had so many twists and turns, and it really didn't get a lot of publicity until the Ashton and Mila stuff came out. Then it really exploded online. It was nothing like the publicity that was around, say, the Murdaugh murder trial. That had crazy publicity because it was just an insane story and an insane trial, and it may get even more insane now if they declare a mistrial. If you want to know why it was so crazy and wild, then I suggest that you check out my murder trial video. If you made it to the end of this video, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Leave MVP down in the comments so I can thank all the most valuable people who stay to the end. And if I haven't earned your subscription yet, check out one of my other videos. As always, make sure to stay safe, take care of yourselves, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye guys.